Hello, welcome to Age of Agility. My name is Nick Lafleur, and I'm here today with David Haigh, a leader in continuous improvement and strategic deployment and change management. Welcome, David. How's it going today?
It's going great, Nick. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. You know, it's Friday, and it's a nice day out over here in Boston, so no complaints.
Excellent.
Today, we're going to get into some stuff about continuous improvement, AI, where things are at today. But before we get into that, let's kick things off with a few icebreakers, all right?
Sounds good.
All right. First is, what was your first job?
My first job was a maintenance technician at a Santa's Village outside of Bracebridge, Ontario. So I got to run around with a weed whacker and take care of the grounds so that folks have a great time at the park. And I got to meet Santa Claus.
That's pretty cool. Is that one of those all year places?
Yeah, all year. Santa's there 364 days a year. And then one day he goes out and works for everyone else.
That's amazing. Wow. I don't think I've ever met somebody who's worked at one of those places. It's pretty cool. Any funny stories from there?
I could talk about when the goats ran into me and tried to knock me down, or it wasn't always the most elegant and glamorous place to work, but it was always great to see the kids excited to see Santa and
I
have
bet.
a good time.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Second question there is, what's your first concert you went to?
First concert I went to was it's a Canadian band. It's called Blue Rodeo. I followed them for many years. It was in Guelph Lake, Ontario, outdoor festival. Rained the whole time, but we were all excited when Blue Rodeo got up on stage and played. It was a real great Canadian moment.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, what's an outdoor concert without some rain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right. And the last one's probably our most controversial icebreaker, which is, what is your favorite flavor of potato chip?
Oh, it has to be the Canadian flavor, all dressed. You only find it in Canada, and it's a mix of barbecue, ketchup, and salt and vinegar and sour cream and onion all together, and it tastes amazing.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, I met the guy who invented it, and he's a national hero as far as I'm concerned.
That's awesome. Wow, it's like your favorite flavor, and you get to meet, sort of the brains behind it.
Exactly. It's like meeting your hero. We don't always get to meet our heroes, Nick, but I did.
So cool. All right, so let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about continuous improvement, and the hot topic of the day is AI. So let's get right into it. As an expert in Lean Six Sigma, how do you see AI and generative AI playing a role in identifying and eliminating waste?
Absolutely. So what I would say about AI and generative AI, especially, it's been very exciting watching it in the news. There's been a lot of hype about it. One of the sources that I like to go to when I see a new technology out is I get on the Gartner website and look at the hype cycle, and that stuff is right at the start of the hype cycle. So there's a lot of buzz, a lot of news. But when I look at it as a process improvement professional, I look at it through a couple lenses. First is, will this technology help me eliminate waste? Will it help me serve my customer better? And will it help me engage my employees better? And when I apply that lens to where generative AI is right now, I'm not sure the technology is mature. I think people are playing with it. It's really interesting. But it does a couple things today that I think need to change. First off, is the challenge of AI hallucination. So when people ask ChatGPT a question, if ChatGPT doesn't have the answer, it may come up with an answer. And in certain applications, that's not very helpful. If it's going outside of its database, if it's starting to, extrapolate or hallucinate an answer, that means you're not answering your customer's question. You could be steering them down a path that's could be dangerous, or it could be at least something that's going to cause a lot of spin for you and your process, which results in rework, results in customer dissatisfaction. The other piece I'm seeing is a lot of the classic pitfalls in implementing any new technology, AI included, we're just falling into them again. And it's an opportunity for CI professionals and process engineering professionals to be tapped on the shoulder and say, hey, I have this thing that's called a process. Help me think of it as a process. Help me think of it as a start, a finish, a customer, supplier, inputs and outputs. And where does AI fit into that as part of that process? Instead of saying wholesale, well, I'll just take that thing I do and not understand it and give it to a chatbot to figure out for me. Let's step back and say, what is my process actually doing? and work from there. There's been a couple of really great examples. There was a lawyer recently in the U.S. who was using ChatGPT for their research. There's another case of a health services organization using ChatGPT to provide chat text counseling to patients. Both of those are very critical applications. And in either case, if you stood back and said, well, what's the process? I'm researching a legal brief, providing health concerns to my patients. A process engineer can come look at that and say, well, what is that process actually doing? What are your inputs and outputs? What are your risks? And if you introduce an AI into that model, what risks are you generating? And then how do we control for that risk? Maybe you have supervision. Maybe you have another way to check what the AI is generating. Maybe you're using it in a very small context, but you're supporting it with the right training and the right monitoring and the right controls. Then it really creates potential, right? If you have, for example, in a customer service line where folks are contacting your team for customer service over a chat, it's a very labor-intensive activity. It's not something you necessarily get paid for. If you can use AR to help you navigate those chats and answer them promptly for your customers and accurately, then that can help your customer service team focus on more complicated tasks, right? So the idea of a partnership, I think, is a really good one. But when it's kind of all or nothing, you're going to hit some pitfalls that process engineers honestly have run into many times, and with the right engagement, they can help you solve them.
Yeah, so you brought up some really great examples of where AI, without, if we're rushing to adopt this cool new technology, where it might not serve well because there are really established processes in some of these critical applications. But it is easy to see sort of the, quote unquote magic of interacting with artificial intelligence through that, language-based medium. Given a scenario where maybe there is some good process improvement involvement in adopting AI technology, like where do you think that could take us?
One of the industries that's done a lot of work for automation is in automotive, and automation is not something that just happens suddenly. Automation as part of the automotive manufacturing process has happened progressively over time. So if you go back to the beginning of auto manufacture, even before the assembly line, auto manufacture is done with a stationary body in white, the body of the car, and people come up to it and assemble each component by hand until they have a finished automobile, and then it comes out and rolls off for a test and final inspection. With the progression of the assembly line, obviously that allowed for flow, but there was still, everything was manual, right? So a person would come up and assemble this and assemble that. And then one of the areas that there was progress on was in the area of weld. So when they're putting the automotive body together, classically that was hand welded. That was with a team of welders would come up and by hand weld all the different parts of the component. And that's work that's very loud. It's very noisy. It creates a lot of gases. It's obviously a visual hazard as well from that perspective. And it's also one where, given the high volume of work, it's challenging for welders to have consistent welds every time to meet requirements. And so this was an area of the manufacturing process where it made sense to look at how can we progress it further, right? And they'd gone through training, they'd gone through mistake proofing, they'd gone through SPC, they'd gone to a point where it's like, okay, if we want to go to the next step of capability, we need to think about automation. And that's when robotics was coming online, and they were able to, first with manual welders and robotic welders, and then slowly progress into full robotic weld. That's something that's progressed over time to allow for that. But it wasn't they suddenly went from people doing it to full-on automation. There were a lot of steps in between to make sure the robot welders were doing what was needed, and we were using the humans in the right way to ensure that we still had quality in the welds and we had quality in the final output. And I think that notion of progression is really critical to this work. I caution against people saying, I'm going to make a big jump to automation. You're missing out all the non-value added work that's there first. You need to eliminate that. And you're also missing out on all the unintended consequences of automation. If you step through it over time and take a roadmap view, you're going to have much better outcomes, and you'll be able to listen to your process, listen to your customers, listen to your employees, and have a better outcome than just saying, well, flip the switch, automated, and we're done. You're going to avoid all those pitfalls.
So I think you bring up a really good point there, which is like, if you didn't just go from hand welds to completely robotic, there were steps in between. And why do you think folks are in such a rush to adopt, AI technology now at this moment?
I think it's a couple things. We've seen a lot of digital transformation recently with the COVID-19 pandemic and folks having to work remotely and work from home, and people visualize that as, well, that's digital transformation done. What else can we transform? The other piece with the recession and now the labor shortages that we're being faced with, it's hard to recruit talent and retain talent. So it's made it appear more scarce than what it has been historically, and so folks are looking for solutions to try and adopt other ways to do it. The third part, unfortunately, I believe, is marketing. There's a lot of hype and a lot of pressure for people to sell these solutions to companies, and companies are open to hearing it, and there's a lot of push on it. I think if you take those different pressures away and you peel beneath it, it's really an opportunity for organizations to look beneath the surface. Look, don't get distracted by the bright, shiny object, but come back to first principles, right? Who's your customer? What's your process? Who are your employees? What's your technology today? And then think about how to take that step incrementally. I don't think there's a lot of competitive advantages to be had through just jumping into AI right off the bat. There's certainly no market pressure to do it. It's really a question of, let's adopt that technology in a thoughtful way and see how it's working and what do we modify. But there's a lot of pressure out there from the firms that want to market these solutions.
No, you're right. And I think especially when you start getting into kind of the tech world or B2B, there's just 1,000 platforms out there kind of doing this very similar thing. So any sort of edge, is such an important thing in those, especially in those, for marketing those products.
This is it. And it's the marketing of it, right? AI is got a lot of hype and it draws a lot of attention, a lot of views. And so companies are feeling pressure to say, well, I want to be part of that message. I want to be part of that hype. And if I tag on AI, 2 years ago, you were tagging on big data. And 2 years before that, you were tagging on this and you're tagging on that. If it's just a tagline, where's the value for the customer, right? Is it just a way to get attention from people? And that's where I really would encourage people to dig below the surface of the tagline and say, well, what is this technology actually doing? Where is it being applicable? And it is applicable, right? Machine learning is not a new thing. It has a lot of applications, but it's been proven over time, and those are the applications that make a difference.
Yeah, there's certainly value in the technology. I think it like you said earlier, it's just very immature. It's still very new. And thinking, you've got a lot of experience as a mentor and a trainer. And like, how do you, in this scenario, how would you prepare people to get ready for this AI-driven future? Like considering where we are now, considering that there's this big, boom and rush, but also considering, sort of these more thoughtful approaches that you're discussing.
It's a great question, Nick. And where I would suggest you start with is with a really tangible business problem. And I think, unfortunately or fortunately, problem solving is not something that we tend to reward in organizations. We tend to reward quick wins and jumping on new technology and making things fast, but not necessarily effective or well thought out. And in my experience, that's an opportunity to really start with a business problem. What is the business problem we're trying to solve? Versus saying, well, I'm just going to apply AI to everything and it's going to work. What's that business problem? And that business problem should be described in terms of the eyes of the customer, eyes of the employee, eyes of the process. And then you get data around that problem, right? What is the process doing? What are the problems that we're being faced with? What's the voice of customer saying? It's really back to basics on problem solving. And what's the root cause? Why is that happening, right? And then when you find it, then you're actually in a position to say, this is my root cause. Maybe my root cause is I have 10,000 more customers and need to help on a customer service line than what I can currently support today with current resourcing. And if I had to just linearly increase my resourcing to do it, that would be too expensive. So what can I do to do that, right? So is there a way to employ a very point solution in that area? But then after that, you have to still measure it. Right. So maybe it's an AI chatbot. Great. There's an AI chatbot. It's going to help field customer requests. But then I'm going to monitor my level 2 escalations. I'm going to monitor how many drop conversations I have. I'm going to monitor what the AI is actually saying to people. And is it actually giving them the help they want? I want customer feedback on it. Do that in a very thoughtful way. And that does a couple things. First, it helps train your AI. Right? One of the powers of this technology is the learning loop that's built into it. Great. You want to learn, file that back into it so it can learn better from responses that work and ones that don't. Second, it lets you as an organization learn to say, did this actually help solve my problem or not? Did my buffers go down? Did my queuing times go down? Or did they go up? Because now I have other problems, or I'm busy reworking everything that's there. And then to say, now I've tested this, right? I've applied the scientific method. I've done problem solving to say, now I'm ready to do it somewhere else. It's a bit of go slow to go fast. right? It's really easy to say, hey, let's jump right into it. But if you take a thoughtful approach and ground it in a real business problem that your customers are facing, your employees are facing, now you've got momentum, right? Now you actually have a sustainable competitive advantage because you didn't just blindly implement technology. You took some steps and made a difference. And you can show that it made a difference. And now you're ready to take the next step.
I mean, that just sounds so easy when you summarize it like that.
Yeah, but this is a long-term process, right? Problem solving, I think a lot of folks think problem solving happens in 5 minutes, and sometimes it does. But generally speaking, this can take a little while to have to work through all these steps.
Yeah, I think, as humans, it's just not our strong suit. We want everything now.
We're wired for that, right? Instant gratification. Yeah, it's a real thing.
And this is a great conversation, David. I really appreciate your time. I feel like we could talk about this all day, but is there anything else like in this that's really exciting you in the AI space these days or in the continuous improvement space?
So one of the struggles I found very early on in my career was being able to really link what the continuous improvement work was with what the strategic plan was. And when I looked at how different companies were doing it, there was always this gap between what leadership thought they wanted to accomplish in the strategy and what the front line were actually doing day to day. And what I had the recent opportunity to start working on is that idea of how do you build a linkage? It's more than just a strat plan that is like wallpaper, it's on the shelf, and you communicate it to people. How do you actually deploy a strategic plan? And that notion of deployment is quite a sophisticated one. It's that first idea that, well, we have a strategic plan. It's very thoughtful in terms of where to play, how to win, what capabilities we want to create, what management systems we want to create to support that. And some great authors like Roger Martin, for example, have got into the details of that to have a tangible, executable plan. But then turning it around to say, now we want to deploy. So first off, goes without saying, you got to have really great communication to take that message from top to the next layer, to the next layer, to the next layer, so everyone understands what the strategy actually is. But then also to have a feedback loop. So in some planning systems, that's called a catchball. So to have a catchball cross-functionally to say, here's how we're going to grow the business. Okay, marketing team, sales team, supply chain team, how are we going to support that? And their own functional plans. And how does that cascade down as well, right until the front line, right? So someone who's working in a frontline location can stand back and say, I understand what the strat plan is, and I understand what my contribution is. If I serve this customer effectively or promptly, if I'm driving out of stocks, that's going to make my customers happy. That's going to help support our overall strategic plan. That's that notion of that communication. The other is then now for those things that we're going to execute, how are we going to make sure we execute them, right? So how do we have objectives and key results against those? And when we're getting stuck with a key result, how do we overcome the psychology that usually comes up when you're stuck? So most times when people are stuck, they put their hand up and say, but actually they don't. Most times what they do is hide the problem. They tuck it away and say, oh yeah, no, everything's on track. Nothing to see here, boss. Everything's okay. And then you wait till the month before the end of the year and say, well, it turns out we couldn't do that because of X, Y, and Z. Let's set new goals next year. What you want them to do is put their hand up and say, I have a problem. And that gets back to a really basic lean concept of and-on, right? If something's going down a manufacturing line and there's a problem with it, you don't want them to pass the defect along. You want them to stop the line and get people to help solve it. That's what you want to have happen with your strat plan. So if there's an objective we're trying to hit and we're not hitting it, instead of everyone beating their heads against the wall to say, hey, let's pause and look at this objective. Was it written appropriately? Did it have all the information that we had at the time? What are we learning about the execution that's holding us back, right? And is it the way we're executing? Is it the way the target was set? How do we problem solve and find those root causes? And then adjust the strategy, adjust how we're executing the strategy, and move forward from there. And that's where it drives some really valuable conversations. And that's also where CI teams can get engaged, right? Instead of just kind of fumbling around and saying, well, I'm finding some waste, let me drive it. They can be engaged in actual strategic activities that are related to the strat plan and the execution of that strat plan and work through how to solve those problems in a really engaging way. And I think there's a real opportunity there for organizations who want to choose to link their continuous improvement, their operations, and their strategic planning together. You give a lot more empowerment to your teams in order to make improvement. And as a team, as a organization, you can go back to your shareholders, go back to your stakeholders and say, we had a strategic plan. We're executing our strategic plan. This is what we're learning, and this is what we've accomplished. And it's not just something that's on the shelf. It's not just something we're going to wave a magic wand and it's going to happen. We're actually committed to execution and executional excellence. That's, to me, is a really exciting area for that connection between continuous improvement and strategy.
Yeah, I think that's something that I really kind of got through this whole conversation from you is that, continuous improvement isn't just about, facilitating new technology or helping just make processes easier. It's really an imperative for organizations because it's one of those things that you have to have. There's a whole culture shift in order to embrace some of these principles.
Yeah, the key with the strategy, though, when you say culture shift, it's a good point. A lot of companies look at it as a culture shift only, and they're kind of stuck. It's like, what do I shift about my culture? But if you start it with the strategic plan and say, well, the strategic plan is grounded in my customers, it's grounded in my employees, and I'm going to care about how I execute. Now, this is a way to start shifting the culture because we've made some goals. We're going to measure how we do against them, and we're going to adjust based on how the execution goes. That is a powerful culture change tool. The other part that's part and parcel of that is changing the culture from one that hides problems to ones that actually celebrates them. And I've been in cultures where, to the point where a problem comes up, people start to laugh and applaud because they're so excited to see a problem. That's a massive culture change, but that is the kind of thing that tangibly frontline people can see, employees can feel, and want to be a part of because know that, work is getting better. I may complain about it. It may never seem like it's getting better, but now they're actually committed to making improvements and making my life easier and making it easier for me to serve my customer.
Oh, absolutely. What a place to work at, right? Where they're celebrating the problems because it means you get to learn something. It means you get to, improve something.
Yeah, precisely. Right. There's something you can connect to something bigger than just with your day to day. Right. And you can be part of something important.
Oh, that's great. What a great, I think that's such a great piece that we can kind of end on here. But, I love talking to you today, David. If there's, usually we like to ask folks if there's anything you'd like to promote, where folks can follow your work and stay in touch.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. I'm there. You just search for David Haigh. I'm one of the David Haighs, but the one who's doing continuous improvement. And we're happy to connect with folks there and collaborate.